Alrighty, good afternoon. I'm Jonathan Albin and this is NycosRPG. I haven't been here in a few days and it's been a rather revealing amount of time I've spent looking and introspecting about role-play games and the very nature of this channel. And it's come to my attention that there have been some major changes in role-playing. Who knew? So today we're going to be talking about both the old elements of role-playing that may have been overlooked and the new elements of role-playing that now are needing to be embraced. So I have a question for you. What is it you see in the future? And I'll be waiting for your answer near the end. But make sure you stay to the end because I've got some interesting revelations before then. Let's get to it.
Absorbing damage is the name of the game. From the claws of monsters or the heat from a ball of flame. Our strength in numbers is a roll of the dice.
Alrighty, so today we're going to be talking, as I said, about role-playing and its experience through the years. As you may know, I've been GMing for 50 years, and because I've been so constant in role-playing from the beginning until now, many of the game sessions that I run have been literally continuations of the week before that and the week before that and the week before that. And so when you have that kind of a legacy, you have players that get used to certain characteristics and themes and elements in the game. And today we're going to juxtapose the variance between that and a much more short themed fast play such as a series of one-shots. And I'm going to kind of push them together in ways so you can look at them individually. So we're going to start off talking about the pros and the cons of the long tail campaign. And the reason I promote that or preach that is the mechanism from which I learned the game. When role-playing originally started, the elements of the sessions were single shot in form. In other words, you only worried about what happened in that week's adventure and you didn't do much to carry it forward. But the form of most literature in the fantasy setting, at least at that point in time, was definitely lockstep long term. And so it was a natural extension for a game master to want the story to go on week over week over week, whereas it may be for the players not as important. And I think we'll see some of those differences between the two as we go through these. So the biggest thing about playing an ongoing campaign week over week over week is it becomes familiar. You get to know what everybody's particular peccadillos are. You know when the dice are rolling hot and when they're not. And you also know when players are going to be doing crazy things because of their temperament. And all of that goes to making for a great game session, but it does lend itself to the idea of each session, each week, needing to be an extension of the one before. And so, therefore, it becomes familiar and enjoyable because there aren't any changes week over week. For the most part, there's nothing new that needs to be added, no innovations that really need to be taken into account. Now, the downside, of course, to a stable long-term campaign is what I call the lore burden. And when you are playing a one-shot and you are playing new characters and you don't have a lot of detail you need to bring to the table, the amount of lore, amount of information available to the players can be limited, and it actually therefore is easy for a player to pick up and move with it. The downside, of course, becomes when you are adding new players to an ongoing campaign, because the amount of lore they need to know to be up to speed on what the players are doing gets to be problematic pretty quickly, and so you end up with a situation of this lore burden, this anchor that's sort of placed on their shoulders. It's really no surprise that players developed campaign protocols for who was continuing in the story each week, and a game master would set up in advance of the sessions how many sessions it would be and for how many weeks the players would be together, so they would build a template or a structure for it. But that does make for a difficulty when adding new players. In addition, when you're looking at adding story week over week, there is a richness in the story that develops from being able to hold information over from week to week and let the players grab a hold of and make those more personalized. These deeper story elements are crucial to the long-term campaign structure and actually lend to the stability of that play style and that play group, because they play the same week over week and there's not a lot of differentiation. Of course, on the other hand, that leaves, therefore, innovation extremely limited. I have a player, bless her heart, who has been playing the same campaign with me for, we're going on 9 years, so she's made it through an iteration and a half, and her characters are aware of the transitional points, and still in story she has difficulty letting other players make decisions or make actions that she can live with, because that will interfere with the chronological stability of the story, and therefore innovation becomes curtailed. And whenever there is limitations to innovation, that lends itself to a lack of creativity and imagination, because you already have an idea of what things look like, and so therefore you don't have to re-explain it. But when you add a new player, of course, they now have to get to know that information, and that's a challenge to allow those players to become part of the story, because they simply don't have the access to that information. Now, what this lends, therefore, to is that in the long-term mechanism, the old ways are the safest. Those have been here longer than others, perhaps have more perception or more exposure to what might be going on, and therefore have a more safety conscious position. But again, allowing a player to become an expert on a situation or a condition in the game does lend itself to limitations in terms of what a player can attempt by new players. And therefore, since the old ways are safe, the older players or more experienced players are seen as authorities, and that itself lends itself to the destruction of the imaginative creative process that we started with. Now, on the other hand, when you have a story that is absolutely stable and consistent and dependable, that becomes boring, especially to players from this new generation who haven't had the casters, so to speak, the wheels pulled off their wagon before, and so therefore when you restrict what a player can or can't do, you're instilling into the mechanism forms of boredom, and the players no longer have the ability to innovate, and that can be problematic, especially in developing a newer player and their participation in the story you brought together. Now, on the case of the long game, long arcs pay off in large amounts, and players who have done it for a while are expecting a payoff. They are expecting to be gratified by the decisions that come their direction. They are expecting to be able to, therefore, adjust and modify their story in keeping with those longer arcs, and it's a favorable play experience. On the other hand, if they have been working on something for 6 or 8 or 10 weeks, and suddenly 2 players come in who are brand new, they do something innovative and it breaks the structure, all of a sudden that payoff now feels contrived or irrelevant, and therefore it's again the push me pull you. When you've been game mastering for 50 years, you have to remember to game master for as if you've just game mastered for a couple of weeks, so that the younger players can have an experience, but also to find ways to regulate the outcomes so that the veterans get to see the merit of their efforts. Now, of course, this does mean that in the longer tail game, your new players are going to feel overlooked, even if you are trying to depend on providing them with access and you're trying to give the game a one-to-one experience. Every time they're having to be reminded of the way the past has worked, remind them what they can and cannot accomplish based on experiences from the older group. This tends to downplay and overlook the new player elements. And so, in some ways, this may be the greatest challenge that a game master will have, is that you can be running a session, a campaign, week over week, month after month, even year after year. And if the players always feel a freshness and a newness to the world and to the actions that they individually make, you won't have this challenge. But on the other hand, the majority of your new players will constantly be looking for new inputs that will validate their arguably fresher or more innovative approach. Now, the question therefore becomes, what do we do with the legacy experience? Do we want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and tell the older players just get with the new times and change the world forever? May that never be. What we do have to do, however, is figure out how to make those legacy experiences worthy for the older players to feel the connection to the story, and for that older connected story to be a backbone or a structure of the current adventure. And that, I think, is really where a product like the NycosRPG really shines, because it gives you an opportunity to show that advancement within the group and indeed within the individual session after session as they advance. Now, the reality is that imagination will have facets. There will be some pieces of it that you'll want to feel old. There are parts that you want to show the legacy of the campaign and its longevity. But you'll also want to focus on the innovation and creativity of your players. And that means getting used to changing up the story almost moment by moment in order to keep it relevant for your newer players. Now, I do have to ask, as I've gone through all of this, what happens at your table? Do you have a story of how your adventuring group, your game master included, has been able to bridge these gaps? Or do you still have questions and concerns about what happens in the game and how that can affect the story on a longer term? I will be glad to ask those questions, and I hope we have a great conversation about it. Until then, I want to thank you for being here. I'm Jonathan Albin. This has been Game Master Soapbox, and we'll see you next time.